And the good news is that we've seen sentiment improving. There's a much more positive outlook.
There is a hope.
Well, there's even more than hope, I would say. There's a real positive attitude.
Hi and welcome to the newest episode, but also the newest season of Urbcast. I've been missing you and I've been missing this podcast. I've been missing meeting interesting people and learning from them, because this is why I created the podcast. That was my first and the most important motivation and objective, to meet inspiring people within the urbanism, architecture, city making fields. Talk to them, learn from them, and share the outcomes with you, dear listeners. This year and this season will start with a very interesting and extremely important topic, which was not talked about much so far in the podcast. So that's why I wanted to start talking about real estate and urban development. So I decided to start this season a bit differently and approach it from a bit of a different angle, but still obviously talking about cities, because this is what this podcast is about. But I want to approach cities from this slightly different perspective, which is real estate and developers and urban development as well. I want to dive into the trends shaping the built environment, but not so much focusing on the design itself, but on the earlier stages of creating cities, of creating buildings, of creating urban projects. And that's why we'll start with a partnership, because this series of episodes, there will be a couple of them, is brought together with Urban Land Institute, which is a global non-profit research and education organization with regional offices in Washington, D.C., Hong Kong, and London. ULI aims to help its members and partners to build more equitable, sustainable, healthy, and resilient communities. It was founded in 1936 and currently has almost 50,000 members. ULI gathers real estate developers, but also service providers such as architects, consultants, designers, but also the public sector. It focuses on different best practices in real estate development, housing, transportation, and other related topics. And today we will focus on the European market, because today, together with Lisette van Doorn, who is the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer of Urban Land Institute in Europe, we'll talk about the emerging trends in real estate and urban development in the European market. Lisette was visiting Copenhagen in November, and that's when we met and recorded the episode mainly about the new report that was called the Emerging Trends in Real Estate 2025. So we'll dive into the aspects of the report. We'll talk about the key issues causing concern for the real estate industry, but also what are the European cities on the rise, what are the European cities to watch, and also what is the role of the architects in all of it, because still, like, this podcast, it is about urban design, architecture, and so on. So how do you, architect, designer, can collaborate with developers and create this bigger picture together? All right, without further ado, I'm so excited to kick off the season, to start this partnership together with ULI Denmark, because that's the main partner of the series. And also a big thanks here goes to Jack Rentiera, who is the ULI Denmark national chairman. And together, after a coffee, we actually thought that it's going to be a great idea to develop the series together. So thanks for that, Jack, and welcome to the newest episode of Urbcast. I just wanted to say, Lisette, welcome to the podcast. Welcome to Urbcast.
Thank you for having me.
I'm very happy to have you here in the studio, actually, and to talk to you about the trends in the real estate and also urban development. You are here on a short trip in Copenhagen, so I just wanted to ask you, how do you enjoy it so far?
Very much so. It's always a pleasure to be in Copenhagen.
Although, as we said, it's a bit harder without a bike.
It's the ideal way is to get around on a bicycle, and which I've been very used to as I'm from the Netherlands and always bike anywhere.
Obviously, there is this competition between Copenhagen and Amsterdam, Rotterdam, about which city, which country is better at cycling. So I will maybe not start this competition here now.
No, we might not go there.
Yes, let's not go there. But instead, I would love to talk about your view on urban development and also real estate trends, because this is one of the reasons you are here in Copenhagen, promoting and talking about the trends in the real estate report. But before that, let's start from the beginning. I would love to ask you about Urban Land Institute itself, because some of the listeners might not know what Urban Land Institute actually is. So could you very briefly introduce the organization?
Yeah, sure. Very happy to. Urban Land Institute is a global network of professionals in real estate and urban development. We have around 50,000 members globally, and that are active all across the real estate industry, including urban planning, design, development, construction, investment, and finance. Also public and private sector. We're really a network of industry professionals that are interested to learn and exchange knowledge.
What does it mean to be a CEO of such an organization? Because, as you said, it is a global organization with a big number of members. What does it mean to operate on such a scale? I assume it includes a lot of traveling.
Yeah, that for sure. Well, just to clarify, I'm the CEO for Europe. Urban Land Institute was set up in the United States almost 90 years ago. So we have a long history. Also, still, because of that, the biggest part of our members, around 40,000, are based in the US. So Europe is a little bit smaller. We have around 5,500 members, but growing significantly, and very proud of that. Well, what does it mean? It indeed means quite a lot of travel, because our mission is focused on transformative impact in cities and communities worldwide. We operate on a very global, a very local level. So that means that we have members located in many different countries, and we operate through what we call national councils, local chapters of members that come together to organize events, share knowledge, learn from each other. And what connects members of ULI is that interest to know how things are being done differently and what they can use from that. Many people in real estate work on a very local basis, but there's that common interest that as we work on many similar topics, face many similar challenges like climate change, economic market circumstances, what can we learn from each other? So as a CEO, what I try to do with my team is unlock that knowledge, connect people to one another, organize events around themes that members find of interest, and obviously in close collaboration with the members. So a lot of my travel is focused on meeting with the members, helping them advance membership and grow the organization, and represent ULI to also create more visibility, and therefore again hope that attracts more people to join the organization as a member.
What are some of the challenges in growing such an organization? You are the CEO of ULI Europe for some years now. How does it differ from when you were starting?
Well, when I started, that's almost 10 years ago, ULI was a lot smaller in Europe. And as I just mentioned, with such a big member base in the US, obviously it had been sort of mostly growing in an American way, if you can say. And as we all know, Europe is very different from the US. We have different themes that resonate here to a certain extent. Sustainability has a different connotation in Europe as it has in Asia Pacific or the US. So what was one of the challenges, but I would say also one of the opportunities, is to see how do we make ULI resonate in Europe. Obviously, scale is a very important topic, where in Europe we work across 15 different countries. In the US, that's a much more common base. And that means that we always have to localize what we do. We work with different languages, cultures, the way things are being done and the way the real estate market works is different everywhere. So you need to take that into consideration when trying to grow an organization like ULI. So at the same time, while everybody's connected, I would say, by that interest to learn from how things go elsewhere, it is also recognizing what the differences are and sort of using that in our work.
So it's many different countries under this one umbrella called Europe, and we'll also dive into that in a moment. But also using this chance of you being here in Denmark, I'm very curious about your understanding of ULI Denmark. How does it differ from other countries? Does it have something specific in itself?
Well, I would say every ULI council in a country is different because our members are different and the local habits and culture is different. What I think is really interesting here, we've not been active in Denmark for a long time yet, and where you see the interest for ULI normally growing is really when a market opens up, where it's not just domestic developers, managers, etc., but when also foreign investors are coming in, because that helps increase the interest of knowing what is going on elsewhere, and also the opportunity to engage with members. And obviously, ULI is a knowledge network, but networking and relationships are really important. And of course, as for any member organization, the business development opportunities that people see from connecting to others. And if it's only a domestic market, that happens mostly at local basis. Real estate is a people's industry, and therefore also in any country where we are active, people already have their own local networks through development networks or design, architect networks, etc. So when ULI comes in and connects people from across the value chain and from many different countries, you see that interest grows if there's more cross-border activity. And in that sense, that we have seen that happening much more in the last 3 to 5 years in Denmark. And I think that's where Denmark, I don't think, maybe not is different, but is sort of on a trajectory now, where I think Copenhagen and Denmark more generally, there's a lot to learn from, obviously, where we've seen Copenhagen progress so much in the last 2-3 decades, and where I speak a lot about it actually as an example of really high-class urban development, and where there's a lot to learn from, where you see an integrated perspective taking into account sustainability, human scale, active transport, economic development, and bringing all those different areas together. And what people often don't know is that it's not always been like that. And that if you talk to people outside Denmark, people say, yeah, but Copenhagen, we can't compete with that, or that's always been. But it's not always been like that. And it's a matter of leadership, mindset, and starting somewhere. And also not the fact that the leadership at the time already knew what it was going to be today. No, it's getting started, learn from that, evolve, and get on the next challenge. And that I think Copenhagen is so fascinating and really useful to learn from, because I would say with the right mindset, any city can do this.
I think I'm on the same page if it comes to talking about Copenhagen. I often also share the knowledge about Copenhagen in different countries where I'm at a conference. I really use Copenhagen as a good example most of the time, but it's very important to emphasize that it had so many struggles and so many challenges. And it wasn't such a great case a couple of decades ago. And there are still some challenges in terms of big-scale developments like a district called Orestel here, which was not perceived as very successful. But I feel like now the new developments, they are also taking the lessons into the consideration. If it comes to the lessons and supporting the members, I also wanted to ask about one more aspect of ULI as an organization and about this initiative called Sea Change. Could you tell us something more about it?
Always very happy to, because it's one of the initiatives that I'm very personally associated with, having started that in close collaboration with the team and the members. And a couple of years ago, we saw a lot of initiatives happening in the field of decarbonizing real estate. And ULI also at that time had just identified 3 mission priorities to help guide our overall mission. And one of them, besides affordable housing, focusing on affordable housing and educating the next generation of real estate leaders, was decarbonizing real estate. We saw already a lot happening around us with roadmaps, action plans, things what you should do first and followed by others. So we asked ourselves the question, is there a role for ULI? And when talking to members, many members said, well, that work is really interesting, what other organizations have already been done. But what we see, it gets really challenging when you are implementing. Often when there's legacy regulation and the real bottlenecks are when you get started. And then we thought, well, with real estate crossing the value chain, working across public and private sector, we don't lobby. We focus on sharing knowledge and bringing people together. We thought that's actually maybe a really good area for us to focus on. And instead of doing more roadmaps and action plans, we thought, let's just bring people together to then see what are those biggest barriers that hold back progress, because there's a real need to accelerate. And then we sort of thought, okay, we identified what those biggest barriers were. And that has a lot to do with collaboration between, for example, occupiers and landlords. It has to do with how real estate has been operating for many years already in the way we value buildings, also in the way how we measure whole life carbon. What do you take into account? It has to do with skills and the lack of skills. And therefore, we looked at all those different areas. We also looked at what other organizations were already doing, because what we didn't want to do is duplicate other work that was already happening. And then sort of with our members, we said, okay, these are the biggest barriers, and we identified 13 of them. And we then also mapped out what other organizations were doing and sort of left them to the side. And for the remaining ones, we said to our members, what do you want us to focus on? What is the biggest bottleneck for you? And our members wanted us to focus on how to incorporate these risks in real estate valuations. Because what we see a lot now is sort of the cost of doing nothing. So just keep going, not focus on decarbonization or sustainability more broadly. That cost is nowhere. And why then, especially in a market where we are in right now, where tougher circumstances, construction costs are high. We've been working with higher inflation, higher interest rates. So why would you be the first one to sort of impose more costs on yourself while others are not doing that? And we felt that's really important. Build that business case for doing something and starting to focus on this and incorporate these risks. And on the short term, it always costs money. And on the longer term, you hope that this creates value or at least helps you to preserve the value of your buildings. And that's something that we've been really focusing on. And the key characteristic of Sea Change is really collaboration between people. Because what we saw is that so many players are already doing things, but they're all doing things internally in their own way. But if we want to accelerate progress, we have to collaborate and sort of adopt more common ways of working. So we brought those people together from across the value chain, architects, planners, developers, financiers, investors. And it's okay, what are those biggest risks? And how should we be focusing on that? How do we define them? And that's been really powerful because now we start to develop common ways of working. And now the next step is how do we get them implemented across the industry?
I think that's a good segue to another segment of our discussion because you said about talking and working with different actors across the value chain. And that's why also in this season of my podcast, I wanted to talk more about urban development and also real estate, because so far my lens, my angle was mostly through architects and through designers' eyes, but they are often only this small part of the whole process. So let's talk about the emerging trends in real estate in urban development as such. As we've mentioned, this is a big part of your visit here, discussing about the trends. Could you tell us something more about this report, which is actually something that you've been doing for the last 20 years as an organization? And I would love to just discuss about some of the key findings.
Yes, we've been publishing a report called Emerging Trends in Real Estate for the last 22 years together with PwC. And it's actually not one report, it's 3 reports, because we do this for Europe, but we also do this for the Americas and Asia Pacific. And it's all based on views and observations of members and other experts in the industry. To this edition, we captured views from more than 1,100 real estate professionals from across Europe, from across the value chain again, all looking at the market from their own perspective. And what we've seen, obviously, we've been operating in a tough market circumstances for the last few years. If you look at the last 5 years, we went through a pandemic. On the back of that, we saw interest rates, inflation, construction costs rising, while at the same time, climate is changing more rapidly. We see more social issues, political issues, geopolitical issues, and that all has influence on the real estate industry. And the good news is that we've seen sentiment improving. There's a much more positive outlook.
There is a hope.
Well, there's even more than hope, I would say. There's a real positive attitude. What's been driving that a lot has been that interest rates, after having risen for a while, have come down since sort of summer this year. And that obviously is good news. What we do see, however, is that still has to materialize more. And what normally drives activity in the real estate market is transactions. And many people are benefiting from that by being involved as advisors, buyers, sellers, etc. And of course, in construction activity, new development. And that's also been standing still. And many designers, architects know a lot about that because they play a crucial role in that. And interestingly, they are also often sort of the canary in the coal mine, where when things get worse, they are the first to notice when projects are standing still. But when things are picking up, they are also one of the first to notice that, as that's where things are getting started. And I think, having spoken to a couple, we do see things now after summer, sort of in the run-up to next year, slowly starting to pick up again. I think that's a really positive signal. There's still a lot to happen, and we are in a market that's not just cyclical, real estate being a very cyclical industry, but we also face a lot of structural change. We see a lot of demographic change, we see aging, we see urbanization, we see a lot of migration. And it provides a lot of opportunities. It also provides a lot of challenges. We see a huge digitalization trend where technology plays an important role. Real estate's typically been known to be a little bit slower to adopt new technology, having to scale up on that. We see a lot around AI and discussions about what is the impact on real estate. Will we still need those office spaces where people working? And obviously, still after the pandemic, discussing how much and whether people will come back to those offices. And where I think in many countries you start to people come back, whether it's either voluntary or somewhat more forced. But the quality of the space plays an important role in that. And that provides another element where the demands of the users of the space are changing a lot. And especially in terms of offices, that's where we see a huge need for upgrade of offices to make people want to come back to those spaces. So there's a lot of structural change. There's also climate change that we already spoke about. And apart from making sure that sort of we use less fossil fuels and we decarbonize and there's less carbon emissions, it's also the real adaptation to more extreme weather events, and whether that's floods, heat, drought, etc. And that's not just something of the future, that's happening now already. And all of that we try to capture in the report and get views on. And that also makes the outlook not as simple, where yes, the outlook gets more positive, but at the meantime, people realize that adjusting to all that change in the short term costs money. And what you want to know is what is the ultimate opportunity and what are the sectors and what are the most interesting cities to invest in that sort of help unlock those opportunities. And that's sort of the interesting parts we see.
There are many interesting things in the report, and we'll, of course, add the link to the report because we can't cover all of it in the podcast, but we'll add the link to the description so everyone can just see and download the report for free and browse through the report. You've mentioned architects, and I wanted to slowly summarize and ask you for one more comment about architects and the role they can play in all of that, because on behalf of architects, I'm really curious, how can they contribute to the change and how can they be the part of the emerging trends in real estate? As you said, it is often architects, designers, landscape architects, urban design studios that feel that something is wrong, that projects stop. And 2024 was, especially here in Denmark, was not such a good year. Actually, it was a bad year for the architecture industry. So yeah, could you share some perspectives from your side on that?
Well, I think there's a great opportunity because in everything we need buildings. And what we also see is that there's a lot of change and people want different things from buildings. And we might need less offices, we need more residential. And I think designers play a crucial role to make sure that real estate is fit for purpose. And obviously, when developing new buildings, that we hope to do less, but we hope to reuse existing buildings more. But that is subject to constant change, so that flexibility in designing for flexibility and designing for different uses in the future, I think is crucially important. And a proactive approach from designers to help owners and developers figure that out while putting less pressure on the planet in using lower carbon materials and showing how that can be done, I think is really important. And we already see designers testing a lot in that. And I think a crucial element is how to scale that, and how to scale that not just within one country, but also across countries, because we see different legislations, different cultures again. And that's often not so easy to what's been developed in one country, get that to the other. But I think showcasing that those best practices, I think is really important. And I think educating almost the rest of the industry on how I spoke to someone yesterday that started to use straw as not just insulation, but now what is showing after a couple of years is also the positive impact it has on health of people, less sickness among users. I think that is really interesting and we should use much more.
To summarize, let's talk about the year 2025. And I know you are not a futurist, but you've been talking to, as an organization, to over 1,100 of people in the industry. That's why I would like to ask about what should we expect? What will the year 2025 bring in terms of urban development in Europe? What will be some of the attractive cities to watch?
Well, I hope and I trust also based on the positive sentiment that we're starting to see that things look better and that we see more opportunities, that we see more activity, more transactions being done, more development starting to happen again in making those buildings fit for purpose. Some of the cities we see still on the back of also the risks that we see around geopolitics, political situations. And then often you see a more risk-averse approach. So we've seen cities like the bigger cities like London and Paris being high on the list of investors and developers, but also upcoming cities and cities that have invested a lot in urban development, transport, like Madrid, for example, that has come up the list much more. The German cities are still seeing a lot of interest, although Germany has also a couple of issues to deal with. Interestingly, also, when looking at it from a sectoral perspective, you see a lot of the trends we talked about around demographics and digital technology and transformation coming up with a lot of interest to invest in data centers, in new energy infrastructure, in residential, and whether that's student, senior living, co-living. It's much more new concept where people want to spend time together, realizing that private space might be less, but more common spaces, so that also social issues like loneliness or single households are being addressed. And that's, I think, where we see a lot of opportunity. We also see it is still a lot of collaboration needed between public and private sector because the deployment is not so easy. Sometimes data centers use a lot of energy, use a lot of water. So how do you develop these in a sustainable way? And that needs collaboration between all the different stakeholders. So yes, I'm positive. I think there are still a little few clouds on the horizon where we still need to see how they are playing out. And hopefully we see more sunshine instead of clouds and rain. And then I'm very much looking forward to the new year.
That's very good to know that there is this optimism and this positive sentiment. I'm looking forward to the next edition of the report as well to see how the things are developing from there. You've mentioned a couple of cities. They also could be fine in the report. Madrid, as you said, was really high. I was very happy to see Warsaw, the city I'm from, being also quite high on the 12th place. And it was higher than Copenhagen, for example, which is, of course, like this global city known for the design and being very attractive place. I would love to ask you for a recommendation. We can also, of course, recommend the report, but I tend to ask my guests for the book recommendation. Would you have something to share with the listeners, maybe something around the topic?
I must admit, I already read a lot for work. I'm a person that also enjoys going out, running, do other things. I have a family. So to be totally honest, I don't read a lot beyond work and being also on the road so much. So on this occasion, the report is quite a read. So I would recommend people to do read it because we've covered a lot, but there's still a lot more in there. And therefore, I would like to end with the recommendation for the Emerging Trends report.
The report has 90 pages, if I'm correct, and that's definitely a big read. So let it be the recommendation of the episode. Lisette, I wanted to say thank you very much for participating in the Urbcast and ULI series and for introducing Urban Land Institute on the show. And also, I'm very happy that although we've been discussing the urban development and real estate, we also found some time to discuss architecture and how can architects and designers contribute to this big field.
Thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the newest episode of Urbcast. I hope that it was inspiring, although quite a short one. And as I said in the very beginning, this will be just a beginning of the real estate topics in the podcast. There will be a couple of more episodes coming. The next one about biodiversity will be released in 2 weeks, so stay tuned and I'll talk to you soon.